The room looks harmless. A few chairs, white cards, thin black lines. That is the first lie. Nothing in that quiet lab warns you that truth is about to bend under the weight of strangers. One wrong answer is noise. 7 wrong answers in a row become a force that enters the body. You think courage is for battlefields. Asch showed it is also needed beside a table of simple lines. The trap was brutal in its simplicity. See clearly, hear the crowd deny it, then speak anyway. This was not a test of eyesight. It was a knife slipped under the skin of human certainty. In that room, reality did not vanish at once. It was negotiated, squeezed, and publicly betrayed. A line on a card should have been nothing. Under group pressure, it became a moral crossroads. Subscribe to the channel, like and share this video. Thank you. Now let's get back to the experiment. The terror was not physical. It was older and sharper. The fear of standing alone while watched. And that is why the experiment still burns. It exposed how quickly belonging can corrupt vision. After World War II, the question of conformity was no longer academic. It had become civilizational. How do ordinary people yield to bad consensus, propaganda, or authority while seeing the cracks? Solomon Asch wanted a cleaner answer than earlier studies with ambiguous illusions could provide. He chose a task so obvious that error would be hard to excuse and harder to misunderstand. The setup was elegant, almost cruel. One real subject entered a group that was not a group. He was told it was a perception study, a routine test of visual judgment and simple accuracy. But most men in the room were Confederates, coached in advance to act calm, normal, and sure. The true participant sat near the end, forced to hear the others before hearing himself speak. That order mattered. It built pressure slowly, answer by answer, until doubt had a human voice. Asch studied male college students, placing them inside a social machine disguised as a vision test. First came the harmless cards, 1 standard line, then 3 comparison lines labeled A, B, and C. The task was easy enough for a child. Which comparison line matched the standard in length? In control conditions, people hardly made mistakes at all. The answers were obvious at a glance. That baseline was crucial. Asch wanted no refuge in ambiguity, no excuse that the task was hard. He was isolating a terrifying variable. Not confusion, but pressure from a unanimous majority. In the opening trials, everyone answered correctly. This was not kindness, it was conditioning. The room taught the subject one lesson first. Relax. Trust the pattern. Assume the group is sane. Then the experiment pivoted. On critical trials, the Confederates began giving the same wrong answer. Not random errors, not hesitant guesses. Clean, confident, unanimous mistakes delivered without strain. By then, the real participant had already accepted the room as normal. That made the blow land. Imagine hearing 6 or 7 voices choose the wrong line as if it were obvious to everyone. Now imagine your turn arriving, with every face turned forward, while your pulse starts to argue. Your eyes say B. The room says C. The distance between those letters becomes psychological warfare. No one threatens you. No one shouts. The violence is subtler. Consensus surrounds you like a wall. Some subjects laughed nervously. Some stalled. Some searched the cards again as if truth had moved. Fingers tapped. Throats tightened. Eyes returned to the lines, then drifted to the other men. The participant was forced into a split-second crisis. trust perception, or preserve social contact? This is what makes the study so coldly brilliant. The pressure was ordinary, not theatrical. There was no dictator in the room, only peers, only order, only the possibility of ridicule. And yet those conditions were enough to bend judgment in a task with an objectively correct answer. The subject could feel two kinds of pain at once: visual certainty and social danger colliding. If he resisted, he risked looking foolish, stubborn, naive, or somehow defective in front of others. If he conformed, he could buy a few seconds of safety by betraying what he plainly saw. Asch later interviewed participants, and those interviews opened the inner machinery of conformity. Some men said, in effect, "I must be wrong, because so many others cannot all be wrong." Others suspected the group was absurd, but still yielded because isolation felt worse than error. Some did not want to disturb the procedure or spoil what they assumed the experiment required. Some worried that disagreement exposed a deeper flaw in themselves and felt pressure to hide it. A few held their ground with visible strain, recovering from doubt again and again as trials ran. One subject described the rule of survival in a simple line: "I have to call them as I see them." That sentence sounds small. In the room, it was an act of resistance against collective pressure. The classic procedure used 18 judgments, and the majority was wrong on 12 critical trials. Across those trials, participants under group pressure gave the wrong answer 36.8% of the time. About 3/4 conformed at least once, while roughly a quarter never yielded at all. That spread mattered. Asch was not proving that humans are helpless, only that they are vulnerable. He found both weakness and courage in the same data, sometimes inside the same person. A subject could resist on one trial, falter on the next, then recover under the same hostile calm. The room became a live laboratory for conflict between private knowledge and public agreement. It also separated two forces that still shape human behavior: wanting to be right and wanting to belong. When the group is unanimous, belonging can feel more urgent than accuracy, even for bright people. Asch did not stop with the headline result. He began probing the mechanics of social pressure. He varied the size of the majority to see whether more opponents created more conformity. With one opponent, pressure was weak. With two, it rose. With three, it jumped sharply. Beyond three, the force leveled off. A crowd did not need to become huge to feel overwhelming. In real life, a small, confident majority can control a room more easily than we expect. Then came one of the most important twists in social psychology: the supporting partner. If even one other person broke unanimity, the majority lost much of its hypnotic force. Conformity dropped to about 1/4 of the original level under a united majority. The ally did not need to be perfect. Even a dissenter who disagreed differently weakened the pressure. Why? Because unanimity is not just numerical. It creates the feeling that reality itself has closed. A single dissenter reopens mental oxygen and proves the group is not the whole world. Asch also tested what happened when support disappeared. The answer was grim and revealing. If the partner deserted and joined the majority, conformity rose abruptly, almost like a trap resetting. If the partner merely left the room, the subject still weakened, but not as sharply as after betrayal. That detail matters far beyond the lab. Abandonment and defection do not feel the same to the mind. The experiment mapped more than agreement. It mapped trust, isolation, and standing alone. It also hinted at a tragic truth: prior bravery does not guarantee future independence. People who resisted with support could still collapse once the social shield was removed. Asch had built a miniature society and watched consensus try to rewrite perception in real time. His work gave social psychology a method for separating suggestion from group pressure. It showed that conformity is not always ignorance. Often it is a tactical response to social risk. In public, people may comply, while privately doubting the group, a split still seen everywhere today. The study became foundational because it showed how ordinary settings produce surrender. Later researchers did not treat Asch as a curiosity. They treated him as a starting gun. Stanley Milgram, for example, drew heavily on Asch when he later studied obedience at Yale. Asch showed what peers could do to judgment. Milgram asked what authority could do to conscience. Together, those lines of work helped explain how decent people can be pulled into harmful systems. They helped scholars rethink juries, classrooms, military units, workplaces, and politics. They shaped later thinking about groupthink, where unanimity smothers criticism and doubt. In that sense, Asch became essential to any science that studies dissent, norms, or collective error. Outside research, the lesson was clear. Consensus can be engineered, staged, and exploited. Asch warned of deliberate opinion manipulation, what his era called consent engineering. That idea matters because group pressure does not stay inside laboratories or textbooks. Advertisers, propagandists, cults, campaigns, and rigid institutions benefit from unanimity. Even when they never cite Asch, many persuasion systems use the same logic he exposed. Repeat a signal, display agreement, isolate dissent, make the lone observer feel socially outnumbered. Once the fear of exclusion rises, people start editing what they say, then what they think. The experiment also transformed education, therapy, and leadership training in quieter but vital ways. It taught teachers and managers that silence is not evidence of agreement. It may be pressure. It taught clinicians and researchers to distinguish private belief from public compliance. It taught organizations that one protected dissenter can prevent catastrophic errors in judgment. In medicine, aviation, engineering, and security culture, dissent is not a nuisance, but a safeguard. The science mattered because it moved conformity from moral accusation to measurable human process. Before Asch, surrender to the group could be dismissed as weakness, stupidity, or bad character. After Asch, we had a sharper explanation. Context can bend perception without erasing intelligence. That does not excuse harmful conformity. It makes prevention more realistic and more urgent. If pressure is situational, then courage can be designed into systems instead of left to heroics. You reduce harm by breaking false consensus, protecting whistleblowers, and rewarding dissent. This is why the study remains alive in the digital age, perhaps more alive than ever. Online, the majority is often simulated through likes, ratios, trends, bots, and confident repetition. A screen can create the same old pressure. Everyone seems certain, so maybe I am the problem. Asch's room now fits in a pocket. The cards are digital. The unanimity arrives by algorithm. The human nervous system, however, is still ancient. It still reads exclusion as danger. That is why obviously false claims can spread when they come wrapped in social proof. People do not only ask, "Is it true?" They ask, "What happens to me if I say it is false?" Asch exposed that second question with brutal clarity, and humanity still lives inside it. But the experiment also offered hope, and that hope matters just as much as the warning. A quarter of participants never conformed in the classic condition, despite the full social squeeze. Many others resisted part of the time, proving independence was damaged, not destroyed. And one ally, sometimes just one, could slash conformity and give perception room to breathe. That is a scientific result, but it is also a tactical lesson for citizens and communities. To defend truth, you do not always need a crowd. Sometimes you need the first visible dissenter. The study's deepest contribution may be this: reality is social, but conscience must not be outsourced. When consensus becomes a weapon, the simplest sentence in the room becomes the bravest one. I see the longer line. I hear the majority. I feel the fear. And still I answer anyway. That is the enduring pulse of the Asch experiments. Not lines, not cards, but moral posture. They revealed how civilization can drift toward error through tiny acts of daily surrender. They also revealed how it can be rescued by doubt voiced aloud before silence hardens into truth. So the legacy of Asch is larger than conformity. It is a manual for protecting judgment. It reminds science that the mind is never alone, and reminds humanity that it still must choose. Subscribe to the channel, like and share in the comments what you think about this experiment. Thank you, and see you in the next experiments.